after very rigorous review, there's now a new version, and so this is very timely that we're having it at this time. This conversation will not be very theoretical. It's just for us to rub minds together. It's a panel discussion, so it's more about us hearing your own points of view and us trying to provide answers and discuss together. So let me start by this first slide, which try to summarize. I have just 20 minutes. I'll be very conscious of my time. I'll be very fast. So this first slide just speaks about the focus of the standard. That's the core domains that it seeks to address. So we have information security, network security, internet security, as well as CIIP. Information security is talking about how the standard is able to ensure that information within an organization are protected, and how when probably employees of the organization go on the cyberspace, how they follow the right practices to be sure that data is not lost. These days, a few days ago, I was taking a training on Microsoft Purview, which has a feature around data loss prevention. So, it's one thing to have some of these solutions and how they can help you secure your information. But if you don't have the right policies, the right procedures, if you don't know the right way of using these solutions, you wouldn't be able to apply it appropriately to your organization. So even though Microsoft Purview is a wonderful tool, I mean, it's one of those tools that has a lot of qualitative angle to it. I was taking people on how they can use it to detect insider threats around cybersecurity, as qualitative as how an insider threat can be. Some of these solutions can help you to address them. Then we also look at network security. I know we're all familiar with networks and how they can be used to ensure safety in the cyberspace. So this is just essentially what the standard does. Then there was a study that was carried out by an independent body a few years ago, just to be sure that this standard that we are encouraging organizations to adopt, what is its usefulness, what has been its impact. And it was a very, very wide study. A lot of organizations participated in it. And from the result, it was found out that 87% of all the businesses that were reviewed, they were able to predict a cyber attack based on their adoption of this standard. And we're also able to see that 67% are able to respond to cybersecurity attacks. 73% are able to improve security education and awareness, and 56% were able to reduce the likelihood of a future cyber attack, while 65% were able to reduce financial losses. So this standard is not just one of those standards that you just create some set of documents and you put it in one side of your organization. It's a standard that will really, really add value to your organization in terms of predicting a cyber attack, in terms of responding to a cyber attack, in terms of improving your security landscape, in terms of reducing the likelihood of a future cyber attack, and also reducing financial losses. So we can see how protection of information can move an organization from cybercrime onto cyber safety. And one good thing about this standard is that it's actually it's solution agnostic. It's not one of those standards that would limit you to a particular tool. It will not tell you that you must use a particular solution as your for application security, or use a particular solution to secure your information, or as DLP, or use something as your firewall. It tells you how you can set up such solutions to be able to address your security. It lets you know the kind of feature that should be in place if you are saying a particular solution is your firewall, or if you want to say that you want to use something for your DLP. It will tell you the things you should look out for so that you can make that decision on your own. Then I just have a few discussion areas over here. A little bit of story. So a few years ago, Microsoft, I believe a number of us here, we might have noticed that if you should create a new Outlook account right now, Microsoft they will not want you to create a password. They want you to use some kind of, either you use OTP or you use authenticator, or you use some other means to authenticate your email. And the reason is very, very simple. So they conducted a study many years ago, and they found out that it was not sustainable for you to tell users that they should be changing their passwords every 90 days, and they should not repeat password that they've used previously, and they should also they should not store their password somewhere. Like, they shouldn't like write it somewhere, because I mean that increases the attack surface. So they found out that that was not sustainable, and the only way that they can ensure authentication is to go passwordless. That's why even on our Windows system lately, we now they now introduce pins. People now use pin rather than password, because they found out that the more they continue to promote password, the more they are like giving intruders, attackers, like a database of password. I mean, if a server is compromised, so and you can't also tell people that they should not use the same password across different applications, when on the average most people have like more than 20 applications that they authenticate with. You have Facebook, you have Twitter, you have so many applications, and you are saying they should not repeat password, they shouldn't use password across. So there's a concept now, there's a passwordless concept that is being promoted across so many huge companies because of this research. And that's one thing to consider in this cybersecurity, and this is addressed within the standard. It's explained on how you can go about authentication the right way. And there's also the option of using a password manager. That's also something to consider. And if you are on the cloud, there are a couple of, you can make use of vaults and things around that. Then another thing I want to speak about is when it comes to cyber attacks, when it comes to cyber crime, most of them always come down to emails. A lot of them are all perpetrated through the use of email compromise. I mean, a few years ago, we all heard of what happened with Invictus Obi, the popular Nigerian entrepreneur who it all came down to email. It was an Office 365 attack. So email is something that, when it comes to cybercrime, it should be email security is something that should be at the forefront. And when it comes to crypto attacks, also, when it comes to, I mean, these days we talk about cryptocurrencies. Most of the time, your wallet keys and things around that are stored as part of, if you are on Google, maybe your Google Drive or your OneDrive. So email is very, very core to this standard. Then the last thing I want to talk about is reference architectures. Google has their reference architecture for cybersecurity. Microsoft have reference architecture for cybersecurity. Sans, CSA, Amazon. Reference architectures is also one area that is really, really explored within this standard. It tells you how you go about ensuring that best practices. I mean, because if you are using, let's say you are using Azure for your infrastructure, for example, you wouldn't. The best people to tell you how to go about making use of it is Microsoft. So you can't say you are using Azure without also considering the reference architecture for it. So that's also something to be considered. So because of our time, I'll be stopping here. So thank you very much. This is just a short conversation around it. I'll be taking questions very soon. But let's stop here for now. Over to you, Madam Bukola.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hayo, for that very quick and short presentation on ISO 27032, the standard that addresses internet security. So like he rightly said, please, if you have any questions, we have a session for Q&A. Just please note down your questions. Right now, we're just giving an overview on each of the topics that we want to address in today's webinar. Okay, quickly, we'll be moving to the next presentation by Mr. Adedapo. He's going to be speaking on the recent updated NIST CSF 2.0 and explain to us how this framework, assists organizations in managing and mitigating cybersecurity risks, and also providing a structured approach to cybersecurity strategy and implementation. So right now, I'd like to make welcome Mr. Adedapo to please take the floor. Mr. Adedapo, over to you, please.
Hi. Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'll quickly just share my screen.
Okay.
Nice to be here. So I will be speaking. I don't know if you can see my screen.
Not yet. Okay, it's coming up. Okay, yes, we can see it now.
Okay. Hi, everyone. So I'll be talking about the NIST Cybersecurity Framework 2.0, which is CSF 2.0. It's been upgraded, or it's still in the process of being accepted within the cyberspace and in the industry. Right now, a final draft, a stable draft has been released as at August 3rd this month, barely 3 weeks old. The drive or the push for it has been in place since 2018. So I'll be talking about the framework, and we'll be giving an overview, its attributes, just basic components and its functions, how this has helped organizations align to best cybersecurity practices, and help fight or mitigate against potential threats that threat actors out there are trying to maliciously take advantage of within our industry. And we'll talk about the changes and how this change will help build resilience in the ever-changing dynamic threat landscape. What are those changes, and how will those changes help build resilience? So we know that NIST, which is for National Institute of Standards and Technology, itself built a framework that has been identified or regarded as a good foundation or fundamental to align to best practices within an organization. If you're trying to create a cybersecurity program, if you're trying to ensure that the keyword here is risk, if you're trying to ensure that any potential risk out there that people are trying to exploit based on the data that you have in your environment is being safeguarded the right way. And if everyone aligns towards that, so it helps organizations to analyze, structure, manage, and mitigate against cybersecurity risk. That's very, very important, because risk assessments are a very key component, like a very critical component in ensuring that you have a stable cybersecurity program in your environment, to ensure that if you're ever attacked by a ransomware and your files are being held for ransom, has been encrypted, and you need to ensure that business operations keep on going. You need to ensure that you have backup. If you've not analyzed or prepared for that, there's no way you can fight or mitigate against that. So what are the attributes that CSF framework helps to achieve within our industry? It helps you to adapt to multiple technologies. Right now, there's the cloud, there's IoT, there's AI. People are putting the information in ChatGPT. Aside ChatGPT, there are even other AI platforms there that can help you modify your voice, that can help you modify your visual representation on a digital platform, change your video orientation, and you could catfish someone and pretend to be somebody you're not. There are even AIs that can cook up a song in less than 3 minutes. So the ever-changing technology, the framework can help you adapt to that, regardless of the sector and the use case. It is risk-based, because what we're trying to mitigate or avoid the cyber risk, because a risk can lead to can start from 0 and get to 100 in terms of the exposure. Ayo said something in his own presentation talking about 70% or majority of attacks happen via emails, right? So you could think of Payday. Payday is a fintech company that got breached. Their whole seed capital was taken because of a phishing attack barely 2 months ago. And you have to think of that risk in terms of the email security there. Can somebody spoof your email? Can somebody go on DNS twist and get a domain that is similar to yours and play with social engineering and distract or deceive someone to click on a link that they are not intended to? Things like that. You have to think about that risk, strategize, and create a playbook to mitigate against that risk when help us do that. It's also based off international standards. It's an open resource. Everybody can have input towards it. Everybody can go and access it online. And there's something called informational references in terms of it being collaboratable with other standards. You could use the COVID standard, you could use the ISO standards, even the standard that the internet security standard that Ayo just spoke about. So it can be collaborated here with the NIST framework to ensure that you are following the best practices. Security monitoring companies, MSSP, they follow the same framework to ensure that indirectly they are securing your data with the right tools. So the framework is based off three components. You could think of the first component as a core component, which aligns or enforces guidance in information and cybersecurity activities within your organization. It ensures that there's a set of cybersecurity activities and the outcomes are designed to facilitate communication within your organization and the teams there. So there is then tier, which helps you to kind of like gauge or evaluate your cybersecurity posture in your organization. From tier 1 to, there are 4 tiers. There's from tier 1 to tier 4. Tier 1 is the partial tier, going and propagating to tier 4, which is the adaptive tier, whereby you have no idea about the potential threat actors that are there, and you create a strategy to align to them. And then you are in tier 2, which you are then risk informed, moving from tier 2 to tier 3, which is repeatable, and then tier 4 adaptive. So with this, you can evaluate your posture in terms of like, I think one of the co-hosts is on my screen. Please stop. Yeah, and the last thing is profile, which helps an organization define a blueprint for minimizing cybersecurity risk while ensuring that they align to your organization goals. It's very, very important. So profile, these three components are what make up the CSF framework. And these components operate together to ensure that you align following these functions, these 5 functions. These 5 functions are what security monitoring companies like your MSSP use. Everybody that has a minute. Can you see my screen?
Yes, sir, we can.
So Lulokpe, could you stop that, please? Is it a host?
No, Tolulope is not a host. I think something is. Someone says cyber attack.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, please.
Are you seeing red lines on it?
Yes.
Yeah, so there should be a participant here that has access. That is either a host. That's what is happening right now. Yes, it's a cyber attack because they're trying to disrupt operations right now. So moving on, you have your identity, the 5 functions. Let me recap here. The 5 functions to ensure that you align to the best cybersecurity practice has to first start from the identify function to the recovery function. So the identify function helps you to try and pick up the assets. What are the assets in your environment? The key assets that you are going to try and be they're trying to protect, they're trying to safeguard, they're going to be the key for business operations, your server, your email server, your web server, your DMZs, your key assets within your organization. You then identify them, and then you take proactive measures, which is the next stage, to protect them. So you are protecting them based on what layer. If it's the network layer, you implement a firewall. If it's on the host layer, you could put in an antivirus or an XDR, and even plug in some agents which could sync to something called a SIEM that will give you a general overview of everything you have in your environment and the activities. And when you have that, you then go to the next stage, which is detect, which you can use all those proactive solutions and tools that you've implemented to detect a potential risk, detect a potential breach. Somebody has clicked on a phishing link, and the phishing link is trying to download a file. You have a sandbox. It detects it in the sandbox and then identifies that hash, and then your team, your security team then responds to that incident and try to contain it. And depending on the type of incident it is, whether it's a ransomware, a malware, a phishing simulation, or a potential phishing attack, you then mitigate against it. You contain it and then mitigate against it by recovering. So if you have to go to a particular backup and recover to ensure that business continues, you do that. If you have to wipe the system in terms of doing a health check and ensuring that there are no malwares hidden in any part of the system, maybe in the registry, in the startup section of the system for persistence, you could check that. So all that is what helps a company to stay compliant, to ensure that they are following the best cybersecurity practice. Everyone does this. If you're able to not identify all your critical assets, if you cannot identify all your assets, you can identify your most critical assets and then ensure that you protect them. You could identify which part of your assets in the technology span that you're in that you don't have control over. You can be gradually including them and then following the host 4 functions till you cover your whole asset. So you cannot start a cybersecurity program and have everything at once. You have to start from somewhere. So the journey for 2.0 has been, last time it was updated from 1.1 was 2018, and the framework is still trying to outline the best practice. So as at 2022 February, they did an RFI, that is required information gathering, to try and update from experts in the industry, from researchers, academias, and the likes, to give input on what they feel like, what is happening with the standard right now, how the standard is helping, how this framework is helping us align to some particular standard and build a cybersecurity program workshop. And the workshop dive into all the feedbacks that they got from the experts within the industry. And you yourself could also contribute to the community by going to that link there, the NIST.gov cyber framework URL there. I will share this in the chat too, and the documentation too. So the workshop was released again this year with a working core draft, a concept paper, and then a working draft. So the core draft talked about the core functionality, sub-functions that you could use to achieve the right cybersecurity practice. So the first working draft 2.0 just got released as at August 3rd this month. And that's what we're going to be talking about. So we're going to talk about some of those changes in that draft. This is the most stable draft. So the final draft is going to be released as at early next year, February 2024. And hopefully there's not going to be a lot of changes again when that happens. So from everything that they've heard about in the industry, from feedback gotten from everyone, they know that this practice work, the functions work from identifying to recovering. You have to go through this whole stage to ensure that you're able to identify a cyber risk and then mitigate against the cyber risks within your environment. But there's nothing that's right now that you're going to do that are going to kind of like reinvent the wheel. So it's not broken. If it's not broken, there's no need to fix it. The only thing that you could do right now is to add more guidance to ensure that it's being implemented efficiently and there is transparency in this. So the community has requested for more guidance. They want more guidance to be provided while you are still maintaining the core and flexible naming convention that has always been there. The same structure that has always been there should be flexible and still add governance to it. And then you should expand on how we could measure the main thing that has changed in the functions is that CSF 2.0 has involved governance as the main foundation, has tried to emphasize on the importance of governance as the main foundation to ensure that these whole 5 functions are met in aligning to the best cybersecurity practices. So CSF 1.1 had just 5 functions. Now in 2.0 there are 6 functions, with governance being the first function and the main function holding the other 5 functions. There were 23 categories, and now it has dropped to 22 categories. There were 108 subcategories. Now it has reduced to 106 subcategories. So governance is going to be the key thing here. So with governance, you are employing that you can ensure that there is the right playbook. There is your company is being is ready for any potential cybersecurity attack or any potential cybersecurity cyber risks that you have out there. So another thing that was also changed in the in CSF 2.0 framework is that before you had informative references in the table, but that has been taken off in the documentation, and a new documentation has been created with informative references, and a new thing they've included is implementation examples. So they are trying to shift the framework of CSF to more of like a globally accepted framework. Normally, when you're thinking of the CSF framework, you'll be thinking of only critical infrastructure that has to do with data, that if this infrastructure is down, like health, education, security, and finance, you'll be thinking of critical infrastructures like that, even SCADA, IoT. But right now, they are trying to tell you that CSF 2.0 is more adaptable, it's flexible. You can use it in, as long as you're a business that wants to apply cybersecurity practices, you can use this framework right now. So they've taken implementation examples and informative references and then put that in a separate table, in a different documentation. And they've outlined different implementation examples that are very non-technical and technical that anybody can just go there and follow and pick what is subjective or what aligns to their own environment. So before in CSF 1.1, this is how you would have it. The informative references are aligned or in the same table with the subcategory and the categories. This is an example from the protect function. In the protect function, one of the categories is the identity management, authentication, and access control. How people would have access to both physical and logical assets within a facility. So a subcategory for that was identities and credentials are issued and managed by a particular team, and this is the informative reference for it. So standards that you could use as guidance in aligning to those cybersecurity practices. Right now in 2.2, that's been taken off, and you could find that in the discussion draft, the implementation example discussion draft. I will share that too at the end of the session. So this is the current framework, the current functional framework for 2.0. For 1.1, it's hard from identity to recover. But right now, 2.0 starts with governance. So most of the things that were in identity has been moved over to governance. And most of the things that were still in identity protects have been maintained. So just some changes. So they're trying to ensure that governance has the most important feature to ensure that governance is the most important feature in the sense that it is setting the foundation for everything else in the framework and ensuring that everything is in place. So you are going to ensure there is accountability, there's transparency. You cannot be saying so you don't have a documentation regarding it. So that is going to help enforce that everyone is accountable. So as a CSF 1.1, there were 12 categories that were removed from CSF 1.1, and then we aligned in CSF 2.0. There's not enough time to talk about everything, but it's just like the change in OAPs. Every year, as new attacks vectors and new attack approaches are being implemented, things change. In OAPs before, you used to have SQL injection as a cross-site scripting vulnerability as a standalone type of vulnerability in a web application. But right now, that has changed. That has been categorized into injection, a type of web vulnerability. So injection takes SQL injection, cross-site scripting, HTML injection, and the likes. So that is the same thing. That is the same approach that has been taken here. Some things have just been renamed. Some things have just been changed or categorized into a different function. So as at CSF 2.0, there are 11 new added categories, and not just added, but also renamed. For example, the organizational context, risk management, supply chain and risk management was in the identify category, but that has been moved to the governance function. The same thing for improvements. Platform security is new out there. Platform security is coming up out there. There's even something called platform engineering. They're trying to maybe create a new wave after DevSecOps. So this is just still ensuring that governance is the main foundation for everything. So with these new features out there, how can we ensure that this is going to help us achieve resilience in the ever-changing threat landscape? So with cybersecurity governance being the foundation, this is going to help it's going to help everyone foster a culture of accountability, transparency within the organization, and promote that everybody should adhere to cybersecurity policies and the best practice. So if there is a policy or there is a documentation that enforces that this has to happen, there is no way that everybody within the organization is not going to adhere to it. It's more of like ensuring that security is not just a particular team's responsibility. It is everyone's responsibility. If you think of security as a way of living in your organization, anybody can be susceptible to a phishing attack. Anybody can be social engineered. Anybody can if you give anybody that freedom to go online and go and have access to any website, some people want to watch movies on their working laptop and go to websites that would have a download drive-by malware, all those websites that keep on giving you pop-ups, add-ons, and then you mistakenly install one, and so many things. So if there is something or there's a policy that enforces everyone to align to that, it's going to help with every potential threat change in the threat landscape. Then the universal cybersecurity outcome in terms of the CSF 2.0 is shifting away from the term critical infrastructure. It's always used to be language specific, like I said earlier, that when you think of the NIST framework, you're thinking of critical infrastructure. But right now, it's adaptable to every kind of environment. So they are trying to change that mindset that it's no longer for critical infrastructure, it's for every kind of infrastructure, it's for every kind of environment. It's now inclusive and it is versatile, and the resources out there. So it can be adaptable to any kind of organization size and any sector. Then prevention, detection, and response. In terms of this, CSF 2.0 emphasizes on this too, as it has changed as has made a change with governance, making the foundation for this. So right now with governance and the right playbook, is showing that you are prepared for any type of incident. You are prepared for any type of incident that aligns to the kind of technology that you have. If you don't have a database, you cannot be preparing for an SQL injection, or you cannot be preparing for a database recovery plan if you don't have a database. If you have an EC2 instance on the cloud, you'll be looking at the backup for EC2 instance, redundancy, root accounts, stuff like that, to ensure that somebody does not take advantage of your cloud access keys. Or if you have web applications that are deployed on the cloud, you have to ensure that they are not subjectable to server-side request forgery, because from the web application, they can indirectly make a lateral movement into your cloud resources, and from your web application have information or even gain access into your internal cloud resources, whether it's been Azure, whether it's been AWS, or even being Google Cloud. They are all subjectable to the same thing, and these are the things that NIST 2.0 framework has helped you to align to in terms of the best practices. It's very simple, it's very straightforward, and then it also talks about continuous improvement in terms of, like, there is a new category that has to do with improvement. You identify the state that you are in, what you're trying to achieve. There's always room for improvement. If you had a way of identifying all your critical assets, next way of improvement is automation, to automate that. There are other things in the framework that also helps building resilience, such as the risk change and the supply chain risk management too, which focus on how you interact with third-party vendors. Right now in AWS and in Azure, you can give a third-party vendor access to your environment with a feature called JIT. It means just in time. It means somebody would have access to your environment for maybe 16 hours or 8 hours of the day, and after 8 hours, that token or that privilege, that password is now void. And even though it's passwordless, as you said, that particular ID that is being used to access resources with GIT is going to be blocked with the time you've allocated to it. So things like that you've put in place is going to help with that, with supply chain risk management. It also has a feature for resilience of technology infrastructure. Very, very important. And the next thing about threat landscape is threat intelligence. There's no way you can be ahead of evolving threats if you don't apply threat intelligence. So this framework also emphasizes on threat intelligence and collaboration. So you need to always try to stay ahead in terms of have a way to respond to the evolving threat landscape. For each technology that you employ, you have to look at the potential threat actors, the potential users that will try to exploit you, and collaborate with other continues to improve. The framework is adaptable to every kind of concept, be it cloud, IoT, artificial intelligence, and it has guidance on how to integrate this technology, because example of one section of the document, the draft. Context, which is the first one, and under it, these are the subcategories. Organizational context 1, 2, which is the organization's mission should be understood and it should inform cybersecurity risks to the management. Then the other one is both internal and external stakeholders are determined. They have to determine their needs, the expectations from the cybersecurity risk management. What are you expecting from you align to the cybersecurity practices, or you building a cybersecurity program in your environment? So this is also going to help you indirectly. If you are building policies already for this is already going to help you adapt or even prepare for other potential standards that you're trying to comply with, whether it's the ISO 27201 101 standard, whether it's BCMS, even GDPR and NDPR for us. So, and then you could use the informative references there, whether it be from NIST, from ISO, whatever it's your reference, whatever reference would be. So this is an example. So an example of the first one is you should share the organization's mission through the organization's mission, which is e.g. the vision and the mission, to provide the basics for identifying risks that may impede that mission. So they're already giving you examples on how to already implement it. The other one is identify relevant internal stakeholders and their cybersecurity related expectations. So if somebody is expecting that this year we should not have more than 5 incidents, or we should not have any incidents, which is very, very unlikely. There's no organization that does not have incidents. It's now the priority, the risk appetite of the organization. I try and say that in our environment, we should not have any incident that should take more than high or medium. So that is basically it. These are the changes in the NIST 2.0 framework and how this would help us build resilience and stay ahead with the evolving change. If you have any questions, we'll take that in the Q&A. Thank you. Over to you, Mrs. B.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Dapo, for that in-depth exploration of NIST CFF 2.0 and how the new update or the new version can help us manage our cybersecurity risk in our organization. So quickly, like rightly said, if you have any questions on this particular presentation, please just note it down. We'll be taking it all during the Q&A section. Okay, so quickly we'll be moving to the third presentation on cybersecurity maturity model. And it's my pleasure to invite Mrs. Wumi Faiga. She is currently the Chief Information Security Officer at Sterling Bank NG, and she's going to be, diving into how the cybersecurity model can enable organizations, gauge their cybersecurity maturity and readiness in this changing security landscape. So without no further ado, please kindly welcome Mrs. Wumi Faiga. You're welcome, Ma. Please kindly take the floor, Ma.
All right, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Are you sharing screen for me?
Okay, yes, ma'am.
Good morning, everyone. Glad to be here. So I'm going to be talking about the Cybersecurity Maturity Model certification from an overview perspective. Next slide, please. Next, okay. All right, thanks. Now, this particular framework is a peculiar framework. It is not necessarily one of the mainstream framework that you are aware of or that you are familiar with. So I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with ISO, we're familiar with NIST, we're familiar with various other standards, PCI DSS, etc., COBIT, and all. Now, this CMMC framework is what you can consider to be a military grade standard that we can use in addition to whatever other standard we are working with within our organization. Yes, in reality and in the evolving cybersecurity landscape that we are in, with all the attendant risks, the threat actors evolving as well, we can't limit ourselves to just the ISOs that we are familiar with and the PCI-DSS. It's important that we continue to look out for granular standards and frameworks that will help us to improve our finer technical standard security. Next slide, please. So now the framework has, the maturity model has 3 levels. There is the level 1, there is the level 2, and there is level 3. Now, the level 1 is a basic level, if you may, that is specified for organizations that are at that maturity level. Now, what we will be looking at today is for level 2. The level 1 is more of basic cybersecurity controls, right? If you look at a PCI standard or an ISO standard, they all also have a method of mapping them to maturity levels. This particular framework in itself has differentiated the levels. So level 1 is specific for basic cybersecurity, which we know it goes beyond just information security. Level 2 is more advanced, is the advanced level that helps us to define more stringent requirements for our environment, for the technical controls within the environment. Now, this is a very technical control, quite a technical standard, quite like PCI, but different from ISO. If you know, if you're familiar with the way standards are defined, the ISO is more prescriptive. ISO will tell you carry out awareness training. Now, based on ISO standard, you define what the training should be in your policy, and that becomes the standard for your organization. So ISO is more prescriptive, while standards like CMMC specific. So it's the point is for us to bear in mind and note that we need to, in our various organizations, combine the standards that we're working with. Now let's go to the next slide, so that we can start to look into the various levels of the cybersecurity maturity model. Okay, so this is a summary of the difference between the previous version. We're looking at 2.0 now. The previous version, the old version of the model, versus the 2.0, which is what our conversation is based on. Now, the level 1, which I had said is basic security, basic cybersecurity is foundational. Level 2 is advanced, which has over 110 I would say controls or practices that you need to implement within your environment. And then there is the level 3, which is the expert level. Now, most organizations are going to be within the level 1 and the level 2. Organizations that are looking and professionals that are looking to help the organization improve their security posture, a good place to focus will be level 2. Next slide, please. Next slide. Now, the framework covers 14 main areas, 14 domain areas, which are listed on the screen. You have access control, awareness and training, audit and accountability, configuration management, identification and authentication, and so on and so forth. Now, if you look at this, you'll see that it covers a whole lot of very technical controls, similar to the CIS controls. Let's take each of these domains one by one so that we can talk just a little more in depth. Next slide, please. Okay, so now looking at the access control level 2, these are the requirements within the access control definition for the cybersecurity maturity model. Here, it requires us to pay specific attention to different. The screen is gone. Bukola is still sharing. Can you put up the screen, please?
Probably she's having network issues.
I will share now.
Okay, thank you. Now, looking at access control, the foundation on which a lot of systems are based, access to systems are based, and the security of those systems is built on the strength of your access control. In an environment where everybody has the same level of access, then it becomes difficult for accountability. The best practice, the expectation for access control is that there should be, for instance, if you look at the second point, there should be segregation of duties, right? There should be segregation of duties. So if we go back to the first part, which is the control, controlling the flow of the access control, you need to define, this talks about defining the approval, the approved authorization for each of the persons that will be getting access to any system, any process, any information, right? So this is very critical. Now, if you look at a lot of other standards, you may not see this specification in there talking about how ensuring that you control that flow. Segregation of duties you find across a whole lot of systems, a whole lot of standards. The key thing here is that we should look at this standard and and see how we can leverage it for our environment. So looking at some of the interesting clauses within the standards, right? You'll see it talks, a lot of emphasis is placed on privilege access. Yes, we talk about least privilege, we talk about need to know. But when you look at this standard, you see non-privileged account use. So you will see that this particular standard, this framework, actually flips or brings a certain perspective to security controls that is not currently mainstream. So this talks about please, previous slide. It talks about non-privileged account use, wherein a lot of times we'll have people creating standard profiles to access systems. So what this standard does is it helps you to think about what you should be doing differently. Non-privileged account use, in that, do you really need to use a privileged account or a standard account for non-critical functions within an application? So these are some of the things that we need to be thinking about as we start to evolve with the evolving threat landscape. Yeah. Okay. Let's go to the next slide. So as we're looking through each of the 14 domains, I'll just be pointing out some of the interesting clauses and practices within this cyber security maturity model. Now, number 2 here talks about awareness and training. Every single standard you look at will talk about awareness and training, right? The peculiar, the interesting perspective that CMMC brings to bear is bringing out role-based risk awareness. So the usual direction for most standards and frameworks is they talk about user awareness, just general user awareness. But what we find now is we need to start to have specialized awareness that aligns with the roles within each organization. So knowing that I work with a financial institution, for instance, it's then critical to look at using a financial institution, look at the various functions. So the IT and technology guys have a different focused and slightly more technical awareness training, different from what the developers will get, and also different from the end user type, the end user focused type of training. Then you also have other people, your third party, your contractors, your vendors, even the I'll call them non-professional staff, the people that are providing support within the organization. Those, it's critical to look at all of this perspective when we talk about awareness and training. And then one third item here is the insider threat awareness. I think the couple of speakers, the first speaker mentioned insider threat earlier. Based on studies, trends, and the evolving landscape, you can see that a lot of times some of the attacks and the compromise that organizations all over the world experience is from insider threat. Now, just talking a little about insider threat, there is that misconception that insider threat is always malicious. Rather, there are two categories of insider threat. There is the malicious one, the actual malicious one, and then there is the non-malicious. Now, the non-malicious is based on the intent that the person does not have a malicious intent. However, maybe they are negligent, or they are just not doing what they're supposed to do, or they're making mistakes, right? So this standard, the cybersecurity maturity model, emphasizes, places emphasis on insider threat. It even talks about and advises organizations on how to set up channels for people to be able to identify and report potential indicators of insider threat. Next slide, please. Okay. This third domain talks about auditing and accountability. Of course, this is a mainstream requirement for all standards, all the other standards that we are aware of. Now, the spin this brings to it is the fact that we should also have that the reduction and reporting, that we should have a way for it to be compressed and such that it can be pulled out on demand. Now, this is similar to the mainstream archiving audit log, and they'll tell you, like PCI will tell you which ones should be immediately available and which ones should be archived and accessible when required. So for this particular domain, the basic requirements align with most of all the other standards. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay. Configuration management is the fourth domain, which talks about creating baselines for all the various systems within the organization. So you have your hardware, for instance. In your organization, most organizations use desktops or laptops. There's the need to baseline that. What is the minimum hardware specs? What is each workstation, for instance, you have? What is the minimum standardized specification that the servers should have? So this is what this particular standard, this domain is talking about. Also covers software, firmware, as well as the technical documentation that comes with all of these items. So from an organizational perspective, for instance, in implementing or aligning with this requirement, you'll be looking at the your environment to say, do we have what you call a golden image, for instance, for your OS, right? For your software, that's your operating system. Do you have a golden image that shows for servers? This is the golden image we use to push out. All our servers must have this particular level of configuration, version, patches, with these sets of applications defined. So these are the topics that are covered under the configuration management. Let's go to domain 5. Next slide, please. Okay. So domain 5 talks about identification and authentication, right? This is linked to access control, in that while you have defined the approach for granting access, so you can say in the first domain where we looked at access control, if you define that you're going to be in the organization adopting a role-based access control, that is, the type of access you would have will be tied to your role in the organization. So if, for instance, you are a receptionist in the organization, the access you have to the system will be limited to the visitors management system. If you are a teller, the access you have will be limited to accepting deposits or paying out withdrawals, for instance, right? That's the role-based approach to access control. Now, identification and authentication now defines how we're going to identify the users. Now, the users here are not just physical human beings. Users here would also cover applications that are accessing other applications and systems. Users here will cover devices that are accessing applications and pulling out information. What identification and authentication covers here is about that ability to identify uniquely the entity, the process, the person, the application, the software that is making that request. Multi-factor authentication, of course, is a foundational requirement for verifying the identity. It's part of the validation, the ways that in which we verify the identity of the person, the user that is attempting to get access to whatever system information or data that is the target, right? With multi-factor authentication, yeah? With multi-factor authentication, you should be able to, what's the word now? Dimension it. A lot of times, the focus is having multi-factor authentication for just emails and maybe online banking, that is any other service that has money behind it. However, it has gone beyond that. You should also have multi-factor authentication for logging onto endpoints. When I say endpoints now, I mean servers, workstations, and any other device that you can log in with a username and password. We talked earlier about Microsoft moving away from using passwords, right? But in the time that we currently, the way we operate now, it goes beyond just using passwords. So to strengthen that ability to identify and authenticate multi-factor is very critical, especially in the remote work, hybrid work that we operate in. Just for you to be able to confirm who is making the attempt to log in, you should have that multi-factor authentication, meaning what you have or what you are would also be added to what you know, which is the basic password or the basic PIN. Okay, so these are some of the requirements or the stipulations of domain 5. Now you would see replay resistant authentication as a second item. A lot of times we hear things about man-in-the-middle attack. So what this requires a standard, requires those adopting the standard to do is to ensure that whatever mechanism has been put in place is not something that you can insert yourself in the middle, or is not something that if you capture the session, you can replay it. So this also takes care of session management and such. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. Incident response is domain 6. This is pretty straightforward. I think it aligns with the typical requirements for all the other familiar standards. The NIST CSF, the cybersecurity framework, on which CB and CSF is built on. It aligns with, I think this is NIST that has mostly incident response well and properly defined. So it aligns quite well properly with this standard, talking about preparation, detection, analysis, containment, recovery, and all that. It also talks about post-incident activity. The post-incident activity are your taking stock, your lessons learned, and your improvement, right, for when incidents happen. And of course, the testing is critical. So the testing involves what we call drills, right? Depending on the level of the scenario of the test, depending on the type and what is available, it could be a system-driven drill, wherein you actually create certain scenarios and see how the responders would behave, whether they will be able to maintain the process and handle the incident they should. In other times, depending on how you want to test, it could be what is called a tabletop exercise. A tabletop exercise is a discussion, just a discussion, similar to what we are having now, wherein we say, okay, hi, Mercy, if this happens, what would you do? The Mercy responds, so based on the process that we have in place, I'll first check this, I'll notify that, and all. So this is the 6th domain of the cybersecurity maturity model. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, we have less than 3 minutes. Thank you. Next slide, please. Next slide talks about maintenance. I think this is also a pretty straightforward part of most of the other standards that we work with. Number 4, that is the media inspection, may be one of the peculiar ones that are not necessarily mainstream. So beyond the usual, sanitization. Sanitization talks about removing doubt. The media inspection is just relating to the normal malicious code, which is like checking for antivirus and all of that, right? So this also aligns with a lot of the standards we're familiar with. The equipment sanitization is one of the areas that we need to do, even though the standards will tell you, ISO will tell you that you should erase unused media. More often than not, we use DoD level erasure for erasing the media. All right, let's go to the next domain. We're going to run through very quickly. The next domain, which is the media protection, right? I think this is also another mainstream area wherein a lot of times you'll find the USBs, the hard drives would have proper labels, your backup tapes and all. For those that may still be using that, I don't think that is quite as common as it used to be when we have technology, replication in place and all of that, okay? But yes, backup tapes is still used sometimes, especially when you consider ransomware scenarios and all of that. So let's go to the next slide. So this is aligns with the standard we're familiar with. Personnel security aligns with the requirement of the personnel security within ISO as well, where you screen individuals, doing background checks and all of that, okay? And as well as the exit management. So let's go to the next slide, which is physical protection. Physical protection here, of course, talks about the physical security of the technology, because at the end of the day, if we secure the system and we leave the door open, well, we haven't completed the work that needs to be done. So it's important to monitor visitors, it's important to monitor the environment. That's why you see a lot of organizations have CCTVs. It's also important to look at physical devices that people are bringing into the organization, because at the end of the day, if all of this is not checked, you can have somebody bring in a device that then compromise the organization. So it's important that this is done. So you observe that there are some organizations, before you go in now, they scan you have to put your bag through a metal detector to scan. So it's not necessarily explosive devices that they're looking for. It's also looking at what you're carrying in. In other places, you actually manually write it down in a book to say, I'm taking in a laptop and this is the serial number of the laptop. Yeah, so that things don't get changed in between. Next slide, please. Risk assessment. Now, risk assessment cannot be overemphasized. Cybersecurity, information security, internal control, enterprise risk management, all these functions within an organization, internal audit, operational risk, all these functions within an organization, they are all risk functions, right? Now, cybersecurity, information security has been pulled out as a separate function because of the complexity of the issues within that area and the peculiar skill sets required. Now, for every initiative, every project, every system that is being developed, now, if a risk assessment is not carried out, then we haven't adopted the proper approach to what needs to be done, right? Because at the end of the day, what we are working on, what the objective, the ultimate objective that we are working towards is to protect the organization and mitigate against risks. So if we do not identify and mitigate the risk with a proper risk assessment, then we haven't approached it the proper way. Vulnerability scan really is another form of risk assessment, which is basically scanning what is on the system. So rather than doing that tabletop risk assessment, looking at the issues from both sides and examining what can go wrong, the impact and the probability, the vulnerability scan is, you can think of it as an automated risk assessment. And of course, after we've done the risk assessment to identify the risks, what we then need to do is to mitigate. So the full cycle of risk assessment needs to also cover risk mitigation, which is the vulnerability that is being identified after all the risk assessment. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, security control assessment, right? So this talks about us checking what we have in place as per security, as per controls, ensuring that it is effective, right? it is effective, and it is working. So this standard has defined it has a domain that covers the security assessment that we need to carry out as organizations. Yeah. So we need to ensure periodic assessment of all security controls that we have within the organization. So the expectation is to create a plan. Now, for most organizations that have internal audit, at the beginning of the year, you would have what is called the audit plan. Now, for other functions, you would potentially have the routine plan. So ISO requires you to carry out certain reviews. PCI requires you to carry out vulnerability assessment, internal pen testing, external pen testing. So all of this forms part of your plan, your security assessment plan that works together for the year. Okay, so that's part of what this needs to cover. And of course, you then need to continue to do the monitoring to ensure that the controls, even after you've tested them, they are still working and effective. Next slide, please. Okay, this is quite a broad area. It mostly covers, it is a very broad area. This covers security engineering. It's a very broad area. There is security engineering, which forms requirements talking about architecture, for instance. So you want to define a system, you want to develop a new system, you want to implement a new solution, you want to I think you skipped ahead. Can you go back, please? Previous slide, please. Okay, so yes, system and communications protection. So there's a lot in here that also is treated in PCI DSS. Some parts are treated in ISO, but we know that ISO is not necessarily a technical standard, right? So it talks a lot about what needs to be done for role separation. It talks about what needs to be done for the first one, that's the engineering. It talks about architecture, design, your SDLC, what you should do to promote information security or cybersecurity across that process. It talks about, this also talks about what you should do for your data in processing, transit, and at rest, right? This talks about key management, talks about encryption, talks about mobile code. So all of this aligns quite well with the standards that we are familiar with. One other interesting area that this talks about is the voice over IP. So if you have extensions, the IP phones, if you there are some technologies that leverage voice over IP. There's a way you can integrate Teams on your hardware phone. So this also defines some of the technologies and standards that we should use for this. Next slide, please. So this last slide talks about system and information what's this, integrity, right? Knowing that security alerts and advisory. So what this does is, it helps us to ensure that when we monitor the system and the alerts and advisories, we take action in response to this. So this is somewhat linked to the what you need to do for your incidents as well. Now, you need to be able to also communicate, monitor for attacks, right? So you monitoring the system, the traffic, the indications of compromise, right? When all of this, if there's anything that is detected, this needs to be properly communicated. So in most organizations, typically, you have what is called the SIM, that is the center of your security monitoring. Now, what that does is it converges all the alerts within the organization. And if it is properly managed, it can actually tell you or indicate to you where an attack is happening, right? So this is part of what this particular domain within the standard talks to. This is linked to your incident response. And of course, after it has been communicated, and you now need to take action. Okay, so this standard as a whole, the cybersecurity maturity model as a whole, is more of a technical standard. You can think of it as a military grade standard. It also aligns with NIST as well. So improving and evolving in the digital landscape with all the threats, it's important to go beyond the ISOs that we're familiar with. It's not to discard the ISOs and the PCIs, no. It is to enhance the standards that the maturity of our security posture, right? So we can use this in addition with our regulatory required. A lot of times, most organizations carry out compliance to ISO, PCI because of regulation. This is not necessarily regulatory driven, but what it does is it helps us to still improve the security posture of our organization. Thank you. That's the end of the presentation.
Hello, Mrs. Bukola. Thank you so much, Mrs. Fumi.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, please, I can hear you.
Okay, apologies for that. I was muted and I wasn't allowed to unmute myself. Thank you very much, Mrs. Rumi, for that detailed explanation of the maturity levels, outlined in the model, and how we can effectively utilize it to adapt to the changing threat landscape. Please, if you have any questions, please just note it down. We'll be taking it during the Q&A session. Quickly, we'll be going to the last topic for today, which is on CIS control, critical security controls. And Mr. Victor, I don't know, is going to be, diving into, the vital role that the CIS controls plays in building a strong defense against cyber threats. Please join me to welcome Mr. Victor Ideno. He is a senior cybersecurity consultant and also the Director General at Cybersecurity Nigeria. Mr. Victor, you are welcome, sir.
Thank you very much. Good
Yes,
afternoon, everyone.
good afternoon.
All right. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. It's a pleasure to be on this session this afternoon. So today we'll be looking at CIS controls, the best practices, and how it's actually helping individuals, organizations, departments, as it may be, to ensure that they are keeping themselves safe from basic and common cybersecurity threats that are evolving on a daily basis. Our major focus will be on the version 8, which is the most recent, the CSI controls version 8. And before the version 8, the previous was version 7. So let me quickly share my screen and we delve straight into that aspect. Okay, so because of time, I will also try as much as possible to be fast. The controls are much, but we'll try to review them in groups to make the work easier. Good enough. This is more of people-driven controls, okay? So first slide. I hope you can see my screen, please.
Yes, I can see your screen.
Yes, we can see your screen.
All right, thank you. Are essential in our everyday life. In our current today's cybersecurity landscape, these are very important. They help us as individuals, organizations, departments to ensure that we are cyber safe round the clock, 24/7. It is also important to know that in the industry, there is no room for mistakes. There is no room for any time lag, okay? So expectations from this presentation will be delving into the significance of the CSI controls and how they enhance the general cybersecurity in our organizations. So what are the CIS controls? These are developed by the Center for Internet Security, which is the CIS, and they actually prioritize about 20 different cybersecurity practices to help mitigate against common threats in our everyday, work in the internet space. Which focuses on mitigating the cyber risk, the cyber threats, and common attack vectors. So the CIS controls also focuses on the perspective and also prioritize and simplify set of best practices that you can use to strengthen your cybersecurity posture. For every organization, there's a need to strengthen our cybersecurity posture, which is where the CIS controls come in. These are protocols, these are guidelines that we can use to strengthen our cybersecurity posture. Today, thousands of cybersecurity practitioners around the world, engineers, professionals, experts, and all of that, they are contributing to this collectively to the development via a community consensus process. So, and we can even sign up for request to be part of this community, so we can also share our thoughts as it relates to our own environment. So the CIS controls version 7 covers the basic, the fundament, the foundational, and the organizational. Under the basic, there is a couple of them. There is the inventory and control of hardware assets. Like I said before, these controls actually help to ensure that every organization is cyber safe around the clock. So it talks about virtually every aspect of the industry, every aspect of your organization rather. It talks about your applications, your devices, your people, your technology, and all of that. So the basic covers inventory of your controls, that is the hardware assets, the software assets, the vulnerability management, ensuring that every organization have a vulnerability management process in place. There's a need for it. In case there's a vulnerability, what should an organization do to ensure that that vulnerability is properly maintained and managed such as to mitigate the effect on the organization. Then it also covers the administrative privileges, what controls are in place with relation to administrative privileges, attacks aiming to escalate privileges in our organization, what controls do we have in place to mitigate such? Then we also have the control talking about the software on mobile devices, laptops, workstations, and servers. It doesn't just focus on the servers, the laptops alone. It even covers your devices. That is, when you look at BYO, they bring your own device. It also covers all of that. Then maintenance, monitoring, and analysis of audit logs. How do you maintain? How do you monitor? How do you analyze audit logs? How often should you analyze? How often should you maintain? So these controls covers this. Then under the foundational, we have email and web browser protections. How secure are your web browsers, your email clients, your email server, your web servers, etc. All of these are also covered in those controls. So for every security department in an organization or in every organization, it is important for us to actually ensure that we have these controls at our fingertips. We have a policy in place backing up these controls to ensure that we are always ahead of the attackers, ensuring that these controls are not just put in place by policy alone, but we should also ensure that implementation is also carried out with that regard. Then they also talk about malware defenses under the foundational, then limitations and controls of network ports, protocols, and services. There's a policy, if you have a port that is not in use, it's best you close it. So following or adhering to these security policies, these controls, we ensure the holistic security of the organization. Then it also covers secure configuration for network devices such as firewalls, routers, switches, and even devices as little as printers. In a lot of organizations, you discover that printers are installed on default mode just to ensure that that device is printing, not minding whether it is secure or not. So there's also a need for us to ensure that we properly configure our network devices, our printers. We modify the default usernames and passwords so as to mitigate attacks targeting such kind of network devices misconfiguration. And it also talks about boundary defense, data protection, controlled access based on need to know. Yes, there should be policies in place covering list level privileges or needs. There should be requirements for every individual to have access to any particular information or network device per time. There should be a need. If the need is not there, there's no point, releasing that information. So wireless access controls, then also account monitoring and control. There's also need to ensure that there's proper account monitoring. Then under the organizational, it talks about implementing security awareness and training program. Human is the weakest link in the for all staff from the top to the bottom. None should be excluded from that. Okay. So next is the application software security. A lot of times, it's also important for us to ensure that when developing every application, be it an application that we interface with the public or an internal application, there's a need to implement security from the very beginning. So there's also a need to even employ or deploy secure coding in every application. So these controls ensure that all application software security related issues are properly covered and are followed or adhered to. So following this, we ensure the holistic security of the organization. Then incident response and management. There's a need to put in place an incident response plan. If you have a plan in place, it's easier to manage the incident whenever one arises. So an incident management plan will help the organization to mitigate the effect, minimize the effect of any cyber threat that might possibly occur Then the 20th of them covers the penetration testing and red team exercises. There is a need to ensure that there's a continuous pen test, both internal and external. Then also, by a way of extension, put in place red team exercises for your technical team to be practicing in-house. And periodically, you bring in your external vulnerability or penetration testing team to ensure that there's a penetration testing or vulnerability assessment audit on your infrastructure. So the CIF controls between the version 7 and the version 8. Version 8 tend to reduce it from 20 controls to about 18, majorly just trying to merge a few of them together to make it a lot easier and cover them in groups. So this, as we can see on the screen, this is the version 7 in relation to the version 8. If you settle down, you can actually go through this and get the differences and see how it is going to be beneficial to your organization, to you as an individual, to start implementing these controls in place. So for the version 8 controls, under control 1, we have the inventory and control of enterprise assets. How do you control your enterprise assets? How do you ensure that they are secure around the clock? What policies do you have in place? Even gaining access to server rooms, controlled physical control. So all of that too is also inclusive. The control 2 talks about inventory and control of software assets. Remember, there's enterprise assets, software assets, data protection, secure configuration of enterprise assets and software. It's not just enough to deploy. A lot of times when we deploy solutions, enterprise solutions, we end up leaving them or going into production with them at default settings. Meanwhile, default settings are provided by the manufacturers, the OEMs, to ensure easy deployment and easy configuration and setup. But it is not just enough to deploy using default settings. We should take the extra step further to ensure that we modify them, we customize the settings to our own need. I believe every organization, there is a need for every one of us to even do a self-assessment, a self-risk assessment, know what is most important to your organization, prioritize your assets, and know how to configure your solutions, customize your solutions to meet your priority, your information security needs as it may be. So account management is in control 5. Control 6 talked about access control management, continuous vulnerability management, audit log management, email and web browser protections. What policies, what security solutions, what control measures do you have in place covering your emails and web browser protections? Emails can be not just, doesn't end at your emails, even your email client. What email client are you using? How secure is it? Or what protocol are you transmitting from? Are you transmitting on HTTP or HTTPS? You should know which to go for per time. And we should always ensure we are transmitting on secure protocol. So next is the control 10 talks about malware defenses, data recovery for 11. Control 12 talks about network infrastructure management, then network monitoring and defense, security awareness and skill training. Yes, this cannot be overemphasized. In every organization, there is a need for continuous security awareness and skills training. I've come to observe that for those of us in the tech space, it's easier for us to get latest updates, threats within the industry, right? But in every organization, it doesn't just revolve around technology. It revolves around people, it revolves around process, it revolves around a lot of things. So we should also ensure that in every organization, there's a need for continuous security awareness and skills training. That way, all of the staff, all of the team members that are not in the IT units can also be getting regular updates as to happenings in the industry and how it can help them keep themselves secure while carrying out their basic day-to-day activities. Service provider management, that is under control 15. Then we'll also talk about service provider management. How do you manage your service providers? A lot of times from experience when we're consulting for a lot of these government and some private organizations, you discover security of that solution that has been deployed. and they just proceed to deployment, proceed to, using that solution. So there's a need to ensure that service provider management is in place, and also application software security. How we're ensuring that our applications are safe and secure, covering all aspects of application security, which also entails that we must, at all means, as much as possible, carry out software testing on our applications, either, like I mentioned earlier, running in-house or interfacing with the public. Then incident response management, we've talked about that. We should have an incident response plan in place, a management plan in place to ensure the speedy, timely management of any incident that might occur. And of course, penetration testing. This cannot be overemphasized. No matter how secure you think your organization is, no matter the latest, how latest your technology, the technology you're deploying are, it's also important to ensure that from time to time, periodically, you're carrying out a pen test, a vulnerability assessment and pen test on your IT infrastructure, on your people, on every aspect of the organization. A lot of times, in a lot of organizations, they focus their VAPT assessment on just their technology, forgetting about the people, forgetting that social engineering can be carried out against the people, and also forgetting that people are the weakest link in the information security chain. So there's a need to ensure that all areas are properly covered. So importance of CSI controls, it ensures the holistic approach to cybersecurity. It is effective defense against evolving threats. If you put all of this in place, it ensures that you are effectively defending yourself, your organization against evolving threats. It helps the organization to align with industry standards and regulations. So with CSI controls, you can simplify your approach to threat protection. Okay, by this, you simplify your cybersecurity approach, which is proven to help defend against today's top threats. So you can greatly simplify your approach towards whatever you want to put in place for your cybersecurity protection. It helps you to comply with industry regulations. When you put your CIS controls in place, it helps you in compliance with industry regulations, because a lot of the controls that we actually put in place with guide from industry standard compliance regulations. Then it helps you to achieve essential cyber hygiene. Almost every successful cyber attacks exploit the poor cyber hygiene, okay? So there's a need to ensure that your organization is carrying out a proper cyber hygiene, or is implementing a proper cyber hygiene, which helps you to ensure the safety of your critical assets. Then it helps the organization, or it helps you also to translate information into action. Okay, modern systems and softwares are dynamic in nature. Okay, by enabling the CIS controls, you support your assets, evolving it in a meaningful way, and align your security efforts with your business goals. This helps you to keep a check and ensure that everything is balanced security-wise. So practical implementation strategies covers the identifying of high priority controls based on risk assessment. Like I said, every organization should have a risk assessment in place. Do your self-risk assessment, and prioritize your assets. With you prioritizing your assets, it will help you to identify your high priority controls based on your risk assessment. So what controls should be high priority to you that you should ensure around the clock they must be in place at all time, by all means. Then it helps to also collaborate across departments for seamless implementation. With the controls, it helps every department. Remember, from the holistic view, it ensures every department is safe, and it creates room for that collaboration, because there's already a synergy in terms of processes, policies, implementation, and general workflow. So challenges and their considerations includes resistance to change and lack of awareness. In a lot of organizations, generally, the human is reluctant to change. Yes, so there is that you just need to apply that strong policy in place with maybe punishments as to access control, maybe access control punishments also, to ensure that this resistance to change is minimized to the barest minimum. So humans always resist, they have this resistance to change, and of course, lack of awareness. That's why there's need for continuous awareness, and of course, putting up your controls in such a way that it can be implemented across board holistically in an easy, straightforward manner. Next is continuous monitoring and adjustment. It's very, very required. It's not just enough to apply today and you think, well, from now to the end of the year, we are safe. No, there's need for continuous monitoring and adjustment as services, solutions, products are changing within your organization, policies are changing. Also ensure that you are putting up adjustment in place that aligns with your security goals and objectives. So in conclusion, the CIS controls are integral to robust cybersecurity. It encourages organizations to adopt best practices for a secure digital environment. Thank you. If you have any question, please do ask in the question and answer session. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Victor. Thank you for sharing, how we can leverage the CIS controls, to reduce the attack surface and improve incident response capabilities. Thank you very much, Victor, Mr. Victor. Okay, so we are drawing closer to the conclusion of this webinar, but we cannot end this webinar without, giving room for our audience to ask their questions. So we are now in that space where we can freely ask the questions that we have in mind to ask our speakers. So please, if you have any questions, kindly raise your hand so that we can unmute you to speak. But we have a question from Moses. He said that, trying to get the question. Okay, he said, so this question is directed to Mrs. Wumi. Is the CMMC documentation free? And also, is there any personnel certification on CMMC? Mrs. Wumi, please, ma'am, would you like to respond? Yes.
Okay. Say this again. Yes, the first part, it's available freely and available. If you search, if you take it to the link, it's available online. We'll drop the link in the chat. What's the second part of the?
Okay, is there a personnel certification to this to CMMC, cybersecurity?
There is a training. Maybe if you touch base with an organization like Training Heights, they might be able to support on that. But it's more tuned towards organizational certification. But I expect that there's a training for personnel as well.
Okay.
So that's something that the conveners of the webinar can come back with information for you. I hope that helps. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much, Mrs. Wumi. Mr. Moses, I hope your question was answered. Okay, please, if you have any question, please kindly raise your hand. I will allow you to unmute yourself to speak. Let me check the chat room. Are there any questions? Okay. To ask. So this question is directed to Mr. Ayo. With regards to internet security. So with the population of Internet of Things devices, that's IoT devices, and increasing interconnectivity. How do you see the concept of internet security evolving to address the emerging threats and vulnerability? Hello, Mr. Ayo, please, did you hear my question?
Yes, I did. So you're saying that IoT attacks, how they can be mitigated in today's world?
Yes.
Yeah. What I would say is that, especially for organizations, usually I've been part of a number of VAPT engagement for some organizations, and one of the core things that I usually consider is IoT testing. So whenever people do VAPTs and they talk about database testing, they talk about application security, they talk about their mail server testing, they should also consider IoT devices and IoT testing. There's a popular site that's always come in handy, showdown.io. It's really, really useful when it comes to IoT. When it comes to IoT reconnaissance, gathering information around devices, because when we actually talk about IoT, we are talking about devices that can communicate. You are using a remote, you are trying to you are pressing something and it's making something to happen. So I would just say that organizations should factor in IoT as part of their annual security testing. So it's not only applications, it's not only database, it's not only emails. They should also consider IoT. That would be what I would say.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Ayo, for that clarity. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay.
I don't know if Mr. I don't know if Dollar what is it? Dollar
Yes, Dapo.
wants to say something, because we've actually worked together around this. So he might also want to share some thoughts on it.
Oh, okay, that's fine. Mr. Dolapo, please, would you like to add your thoughts to that question?
Yeah. Hello.
Hello, we can hear you.
Yeah, so could you repeat the question? Sorry.
Okay, no problem. I said with the population of IoT devices and in the increasing connectivity, how do you see the concept of internet security evolving to address emerging threats and vulnerabilities? How can we, address the threats coming from the use of Internet of Things?
Okay, that's nice. So the thing about Internet of Things is to first understand that Internet of Things runs on a network, so you're still going to apply the same network security that you would to any other technology. And Internet of Things still applies other concepts of IT in terms of application, because the Internet of Things device would have to connect to an application. So there are already standards out there to address this. So the Internet of Things is more of like an ecosystem, a mixture of applications, network, maybe a network protocol for maybe a smart home. A smart home will be working on a particular protocol called MQTT, which is more of like a subscription broadcast center protocol that's a central controller is sending information to every part of a smart home. So the controller is sending information to the lights. The light should carry out a function, maybe turn on and turn off. Now, that whole aspect is IoT, from the network part that the application is interacting with those devices over Wi-Fi, from the application part in terms of how the controller is interacting with the smart devices, whether it being a smart light bulb, a smart switch. So there are standards already for this. So OAuPs will apply to solving the security of the application part of the IoT, and internet security will still apply. Internet security standards will still apply to securing the network part of the IoT. Now, the only difference would be which type of connection are you applying to the IoT. If it's IoT could do a connection via Bluetooth, via Wi-Fi, via something called Zigbee protocol, Zigbee network, and there's even satellite network. So for each type of network, there is already a standard for security too. NIST 2 can also be applied there if you want to look into the framework for that. Thank you. I hope I answered the question.
Yes, please. Thank you, Mr. Delapo, for that additional thought. Okay, are there any questions from our audience? Let me check the chat room. Need to go back and see. Any questions? Okay, so the last question, and I'll give the room for any of our speakers to answer. Okay, you can unmute yourself and speak, or if I think the host didn't allow people to speak before, but I'm not seeing any hands raised, so I'm not sure if there's anybody that wants to ask any questions. Okay, so I'll be taking the last.
Hello. Good afternoon.
Good
I
afternoon.
wasn't seeing the hand icon on my phone. I really want to appreciate the team for putting this together. I also want to appreciate all the presenters for their presentation. My name is Grace Ikmowosa. I actually have a concern. When you look at the information security standards, you look at ISO 27032, then I will also appreciate the CMMC that Mrs. Wumi shared with us, and the CIS Mr. Victor also shared. The concern I have, when we put all this together, trying to use it to achieve policies and procedure in our organizations, but if you now have overlapping, for example, there's already an indicator that was taken care of in ISO 27001. I think there will not be need for it to be repeated in any other one that is being observed. I don't know. I just need a clarity on that. Please, I don't know if you get that. Anybody can do justice to the answer. It's not tied to any of the presenter. We have from standard, we put up policies, put up procedures that we want to follow to work. So as you are doing them, somehow you see that some item that you have seen here is also here, That is what I'm just trying to.
Okay, yeah. Thank you, Grace, for the question. Okay, just to summarize it for any of our speakers, she's trying to ask that with those 4 or 5 standards and frameworks that she mentioned, can an organization, use it all at once? Won't there be any overlapping, or how should organizations, adopt these frameworks? I don't know if Mrs. Wumi would like to, answer, or Mr. Victor. Any of the speakers, please, you can just help us to clarify that question, please.
Yeah, let me just say a little on that question, then probably Mrs. Wumi and Dakpo would speak more around it. So what I just want to start with is that there are some of these standards that are mandatory, and I mean like they are like obligatory. That's the regulators mandate you to adopt some, while some other ones, they are like you are not obligated to go a particular path, but you can take several paths as long as it meets as long as it takes you to that end point. For example, now, if we are talking about PCI now, even if there's an alternative to PCI, as long as you have, as long as you are using card, ATM card, it must be PCI. Even though some other standard might address some aspects of PCI, but it's obligatory for you to go through the part of PCI. That's one aspect to your question. However, I understand what you are saying, that for example, CIS has controls that speaks to cybersecurity. We also have ISO 27032 that have some overlaps also around it. We have CSA and things around that. So I think the organization would need to really define its own cybersecurity plan, how it intends to go about its cybersecurity, and follow it up. That would be just what I would say right now, so that another speaker would shed more light on that.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Ayo, for that. Mr. Victor, do you have anything to say before we bring this to a close?
Okay, let me chip in here. Can you hear me?
Okay, Mrs. Smith. Yes, ma'am. We can hear you, ma'am.
Okay, so Grace, you are correct. The simple response is yes, you are correct. For the overlaps, you don't need to repeat the items across the areas of your policy, because ultimately what we adopt these items, all the standards for, is to create that policy environment that is then complied with within the organization. So if you have, if you're in an organization that processes card data and PCI is required, your policy would reflect the requirements of PCI. In PCI, I'm giving a specific example now. In PCI, there's awareness training in there. The specific one they will ask for is secure coding for developers, right? And then general awareness. Now, because you are now combining your security, your cybersecurity program in your organization with the cybersecurity maturity model, you can now, under the training, under the policy, you can now add other things to it to say, okay, we'll also perform role-based training, such that it enhances it, but you are not repeating. So you can then say, okay, in addition to what PCI requires me to do, right, what ISO requires me to do, I want to add this to it, so it increases and improves my maturity, as well as improves my security posture. So yes, you're right, you don't have to repeat it. You can just pull out the items that are relevant to you that you want to adopt. Okay, so I hope that answers your question.
Wow, wow, wow. Honestly, to be sincere, both of you have really dealt with it. Thank you so much. I'm really grateful.
Right.
I'm really grateful.
Okay.
To be frank and sincere, you just gave me what I really needed. Thank you. Can I go ahead to answer the second one?
Okay, please, we'll make
Okay.
accommodate that question.
I should go ahead with that.
Yes, this is the last question
Okay.
for today. So that we can
Yes, last question. Thank you so much. The other concern, before I even thought of the one I just raised just now, you see, we have a policy procedure developed. What do you think is the best way we can actually make our staffs get to understand this policy in detail? That is, they are able to know that we have policy. Fine, they are aware we have policy, but in detail to their job function, how do we communicate these policies and procedures to end users, staff, process owner? Thank you so much.
Okay, Mr. Victor, would you like to take this question? Oh, okay, I think Mr. Ayo, would you like to answer the question?
Yeah, okay. So you are saying that how you can communicate policies and procedures and guidelines around information security to staff in actual detail. I'll be using an example for this. For example, now when it comes to email security, so I think the way to actually go about it is to conduct periodic audits and probably give some kind of support, some kind of gift to people that follow, to staffs that follow these policies and procedures. And I'll be giving an example very, very quickly. When it comes to email security, there was an organization that I was conducting some kind of test for. That's like phishing test. So there's already a policy document that you should not click on links you are not sure of. You should not open emails that are suspicious and things around that. And the staffs of that organization, after they like send the email weekly, they always like reply that acknowledge that I have read the email. I have acknowledged that in terms of security, certain things should not be done. However, when we conducted this phishing test, we found out that virtually all the employees that we selected, that we sent this email to, virtually all of them not only opened the link, but they also clicked on the malicious link. So, but after we now told them that at so time, at so location, you clicked on, there was a suspicious email sent to you, and you clicked on it, they were now more conscious about it. The next time that we now add that such a test again, we had a lower number. So I would say that the way to actually get these policies to be part of employees is by that learning process. Conduct internal reviews, internal audits, and let them know the results and let them know what they need to do better. Just the policies on its own, just the document, just the Microsoft Word document might not really get into them, as it were, compared to when you have all these periodic internal audits and let them know where they are falling short. So that's what I will say about it. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much. I'm grateful. I'm really
that?
grateful. I'm really grateful. Yes, thank you so much.
Okay, Mr. Victor, would you like to add something to what Mr. Ayo has spoken?
Yes, just to add to what Mr. Ayo has spoken, a lot of times the policies are bulky because they're trying to pay attention to every detail. So as much as possible, let's try to make a revised version of these policies in clear and simple language to all staff. Regular training and workshop should be part of it. Then we should use case studies and examples, things to visualize what the policies are talking about. It will help the staff better understand the details of these policies beyond just reading text all through. then we should go the extra mile of customizing these policies and awareness, if possible, to departments. Meaning every department, for example, accounting, they understand their accounting terms better. So if we can customize the awareness policies, materials, and all for accounting department, they will better understand it. They will better embrace it. If we are customizing that same policy to another department, let's say transport department or logistics department, they will better understand it if it's coming in their own terms. So as much as possible, let's also go the extra mile of customizing it for departments. Then let's also put in place frequent reminders. The organizations where we have consulted for, and we ensure that every morning, as you are opening your email for the first time of the day in the morning, there's a notification popping up giving you the cybersecurity tip for the day. So that can also help that continuous awareness and reminder in their minds. Then in-house, you can set up, like what Mr. Ayo said, you can set up your phishing platform to be sending out regular phishing emails, and there should be recommendations. So if someone click a phishing email, it shouldn't just stop there. It should go the extra mile of recommending that, okay, you have successfully clicked a malicious email. These are the steps you should take so that subsequently you don't have to click emails coming in this format. And that recommendation we recommend to the user on the kind of training. It may be a 30 minutes training, it may be a 5 minutes training, or a tips, list of tips the user could just read immediately after clicking that email, so that subsequently he or she will no longer fall to that kind of email. So you can set up your internal phishing simulation system where you send out periodic phishing emails, and as users are falling prey to it, the system is automatically giving them recommendations and solutions against such. Then also ensure you can, if you can convert it to game mode, there are users who understand by visuals more than text. So try as much as possible to customize these policies and controls into visual environment, visual simulations that will better help them understand and get it stuck to their minds and their general working procedure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate.
Okay, Ms. Grace, I hope your questions was answered.
Very, very. This webinar was just for me. I'm grateful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ms. Grace. Thank you so much, everyone. So as we approach the end of our enlightening panel discussion on cybersecurity trends and future outlook, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to our distinguished panelists, our engaged audience, and everyone who has contributed to making this event a success. My sincere appreciation goes to our panelists. You guys have done fantastically well, dealing with these various topics that we discussed today. Thank you for your contributions. Thank you for your perspective and your willingness to, share your knowledge with all of us. And I hope that, with what we've learned today, we have taken a step further to securing, our digital future. So as we conclude this session, like I introduced myself, my name is Bukola Bamidele, and I work with Standards and Best Practice. Standards and Best Practice is a global accredited certification body that provides, ISO certifications to individuals of various management systems such as 9001, cybersecurity, ISO 27032, information security, and you can go on to our website, www.smbpp.net, to find more, to learn more about us and our certification courses. Thank you very much. Please stay connected with us and keep an eye out for our future event and discussion. We wish you continued success, security, and progress in all your endeavors. Please enjoy the rest of your day. Bye for now. Yeah, I see some people asking. Yeah, of course, we get the recordings. We're going to get the recordings and the presentation used. We'll send it across to all of us. Thank you.